Tanking in Midnight wasn't something I expected to like so much before the alpha, and now especially in the beta, where I've really fallen in love with it. Feels like tanks have been yanked around quite a bit. In Dragonflight, they were these immortal gods that just didn't die unless nuked or made a massive mistake, and the War Within tried to nerf tanking to bring them back to a reasonable power level, but overshot a bit, and it made tanking so punishing that many players didn't even want to play it. And while I think it's important that Blizzard went to go and find that balance, I think they really nailed it here at Midnight. My name is Baz the Healer, and this video is from the perspective of, yes, a healer player, but somebody who's gotten into tanks, and while I mostly pug 10 through 12s this whole season of the War Within, but I think my pug-focused healing perspective is an interesting one. Let's dive into it. The first topic I want to bring up is this defensive self-healing overhaul. Unlike in the War Within Season 1, this balance has been achieved through talent reworks and dungeon mobs. You feel like more of your general survivability and the damage you take is within your active and rolling mitigation and how well you play it. So for Brewmaster, for instance, Stagger and Shuffle do a lot to keep you upright, you take a lot of damage from it. However, if you use your Purifying Brew and your Celestial Brew correctly and at the right times, you get enough padding that your self-healing, which is definitely nerfed, will be enough to kind of self-sustain you and get your health bar moving back upright. Even when you're facing a lot of mobs, it feels like you can hang on for an unbelievable amount of time if you play those tools correctly. Now, when you have your major offensive cooldowns running, that familiar, unstoppable feeling is there. Every single tank I tested, from Brewmaster, Prot Warrior, Blood, and Vengeance, all felt extremely strong when in their cooldowns. I didn't get to play Bear or Prot Pally personally, but when healing a tank that was in Incarn or in Wings, it provided a similar level of strength just from my observations. You also still have your typical major defensive cooldown. Now, these were culled, so you have less of them than you did before. However, they feel sufficiently powerful in catching you as you start to fall. I didn't think I needed to send them nearly as often, but when I did send them, it was exactly what the doctor ordered. But eventually, you will be dry in your major defensives, and whenever you are just in no cooldown territory, your healer is likely going to have to help you out. It doesn't feel bad though. It feels like you can hold on for a long while, and from every healer I've tested healing tanks, it's pretty easy to catch a tank as they fall. Even on Discipline Priest, who outside of pain suppression doesn't feel like a great tank healer, and yet I was able to catch tanks on disc with no problem. I do prefer this because not only does it mean you actually get to interact with your healer if the pull lasts too long, but you feel your windows of power so much better. But I need to know, I didn't feel powerless without my cooldowns, it just highlighted a player's mastery over their tank of choice. I am less good at Vengeance, and I definitely didn't build correct my first time through, and you could feel it. I healed other Vengeance players, and it felt like they were easier to heal than I knew I was able to be healed. And when I did get my talents in line and I started playing a bit better, yeah, I could really feel how much better I was playing, but I knew that, like, I'm just not quite that good. I let some windows fall off, I don't prioritize certain buttons in the right order, and you can really notice. But when I'm on Brewmaster or Prot Warrior, it felt way easier in those same situations that I would get myself into. I like that this is highlighting how good a player can play a tank, and while you do need to have your healer catch you every now and again, it doesn't feel like they're going to be the majority of the reason you live. It feels like a moment in time where you will need to work with them, and I think that's fun. Now, I'm not sure if this balance is going to persist into the actual live Midnight release. However, we are scaled to high hero gear right now, and I'm in a 10 feeling these things. So I'd say it's looking good for healer to tank balance, and even in a 12 as a healer, it still felt very similar. Now, what about those pulls in that said 10 with that level of gear? It really feels like it's up to the tank how hard they want to pull. A single pull isn't too scary, so I think a newer tank is going to find a lot of good wiggle room for experimenting and learning. But with an experienced tank that wants to grab a bunch of mobs and do a ton of damage with their team, I think you can get pretty crazy with it, especially if you use your cooldowns correctly and optimally. As I said, you are going to feel it as your cooldowns fall off, but with a skilled healer and a skilled tank, I think the sky truly is the limit in terms of how big you want to pull. As a healer main, I actually really do like interacting with my tank. If I need to babysit the tank while healing other people, it can certainly get taxing for a long period of time, but when my tank gets hit with some busters and I need to work with them for a moment, it's fun. but because of the changes to tanking, you're going to absolutely feel it if your healer is totally ignoring you on a big pull. When it comes to actually healing tanks, nothing's really changed here. Brewmaster and Bear are still the champions of being easy to heal. I know not everyone knows when to heal a Brewmaster, but topping them off and getting them back on their feet isn't very hard. Blood is easier to heal. It's still a little hard to heal. Their health bar still ping-pongs, but it feels a little less insane. It feels like you know when they're struggling versus when they have things under control now. Vengeance similarly will just take a lot of damage very quickly. If they run away or they kite correctly or use their tools, you should be able to get them up with no problem. Warriors were absolutely easy to heal. I didn't have any problems with them. Usually just Last Stand is kind of broken. Is it called Last Stand or is it called Veterans? What's the name of their cheat death? Why am I forgetting this? But it's the cheat death that goes off that if they drop below a certain amount of health, they take, I think, something like 70 or 80% reduced damage. It's crazy. Anyway, that's still there. It makes catching a warrior very easily. Now, I want to tell you good things about Paladin as well. But the problem is when I did get to play with a Paladin, the tank seemed very good, but I'm not sure if it was Seat of the Trumpet being like too difficult of a dungeon or overtuned, but we were definitely having some bugs with Paladin's defensives and things did not feel good. So I just like to say, like, you know what? No information, no note on that. I'm going to assume it's a bug because when I played Paladin briefly in the alpha, it felt really good. So I'm going to assume that this will get addressed and I'm not going to worry about it too much. Bosses were a highlight for me when I was tanking. I love that what I had to do as a tank mattered more often than it does right now in the War Within. Bosses with positioning requirements. There's a boss with a tank buster that you want to soak on top of a boulder so you avoid a stun. There's a moving jacuzzi boss with a need to rush to it before it targets a teammate for a tank buster. And I especially loved the final boss of Pit of Saran. You have to move around, setting up your team to freeze these empowered pile of bones, grabbing the one hopefully remaining dangerous mob, and then keeping threat on the army of dead as they collapse in on your team. It's peak tank fantasy, and I loved it. I really enjoy when tanks get these little mini games where, as a tank, you need to be doing something silly or specific in a fight to keep people alive or to not explode on contact with a mechanic. And I felt across the 4 dungeons I got to test, that was certainly a highlight. Alcathar has always been a good example of that, and with a rework to the bird fight that I think is quite a bit more enjoyable than it was in Dragonflight, I think the entire dungeon is super fun to tank now. Now, on to controlling mobs. With the changes to crowd control and how many casters that there really aren't anymore, I find that my role as a tank and my tools in controlling mobs were especially satisfying to use. It felt like my Ring of Pieces, my leg sweeps, my storm bolts were contributing a lot more than before, and with kicks interrupting for longer in PvE content, it did feel like you got more value out of your tools. For those of you who don't know, there has been a change to the way mobs cast. Essentially, if you have like 5 casters, they're not all going to target one poor hunter and just bolt them to death instantly. They try to look for separate targets so that they don't overlap too much. That doesn't mean they won't execute somebody who's low on health. It just means that you're going to not see someone get 100 to 0'd by 5 different bolt spells in a given moment. However, there are interesting mobs that, like say in Skyreach, all fixate on one player, and thus you need to keep that player safe or they're going to probably die to all the mobs coming in to swing on them. Now, I'm not sure if this feature is going to be super fun out of the gate. I think it's a good change, but this does mean that the incoming damage profile, while less exciting than it was before, is also less lethal, and so therefore maybe this makes packs less interesting, but this does give Blizzard room to kind of grow with these focused mechanics where maybe you have 5 sharpshooters that do intentionally target one person, and that could be a fun moment for the players to try to navigate, rather than just being bolted because the AI decided it was your day to die. So I do like this. It might be underbaked in the first season, we'll have to see, but they're going to clearly be able to iterate on this system, and I think we'll have more interesting mobs rather than randomly lethal ones. Now let's talk about tank routing a little bit. I'm not a professional in this category, but currently in the War Within, I don't really think about my damage cooldowns too much. Like, I'm supposed to, right? If I'm doing a big pull, I'm going to want to have some damage cooldowns. But even if I don't, I can go in there with a defensive and still keep threat. I'm only in a 12, right? It's not going to hurt that bad. But that is kind of a bit of a mistake, right? You want your cooldowns to feel like they're going to influence how you play. And I feel like I felt that in Midnight. Even in a 10, at this relative hero gear scaling, I was thinking more often about, oh, are my cooldowns up? can I double this? Can I afford to do this? Do I have the defensives to survive this while I wait for this cooldown to come back? And I think it's a good thing that the game design was making me think about that more. I don't know if it's just been on my mind because it's something I knew I had to improve at, or if it's truly the game design, but I like to think it's the game design making me want to think about my cooldowns more that's at work here. And I think there's going to be a lot of really fun routes as well. Players are going to find tons of cool routes or mobs to pull onto a boss, and I think that's going to be very exciting, especially in more competitive keys. So I'm looking forward to what the theory crafters are going to do with this dungeon pool. The tank threat was in an interesting spot. My gut reaction was that I felt like maybe I needed a little more threat, but when I look back on the polls in my VODs that I lost threat on, it was one of two things. Either I definitely could have done my opener better, and I got a little bit lazy. Maybe I was too focused on controlling a mob and not enough on getting threat. And sometimes it was the DPS blasting on all cylinders without a single thought in the world as to what that might not do. So upon review, I think the threat balance is pretty close. I like it when threat is interesting in an MMO, but I really don't want my players to be holding back their damage for too long, because I think that can be not so fun to play with. Like, I know I don't like holding back my damage, but at the start of a pull, I feel like that's reasonable. It felt like my threat mattered to some extent. I can't get lazy, I can't fall asleep on the job as a tank, or someone's going to rip threat. However, it wasn't hard to maintain that threat once I established it. I know that I'm not like an authority on tanking, but I've pugged a lot of keys as a tank, and I need to be 100% honest with you. This is the most fun I've had tanking outside of niche undergeared moments in, say, Dragonflight. I didn't feel like a one-monk wrecking crew, but in my cooldowns and when I had control, I did feel like a threat. And tanking for me isn't cool when I'm just some unstoppable force 24/7. Tanking is cool when, to me, I feel like I'm the front line. I'm the wall the enemies must climb, a problem they can't afford to take their eyes off of. And I know that's more of an aesthetic and poetic take on tanking, but I felt more like that in Midnight than I have at any point in the War Within. And it's worth noting, I still like tanking in the War Within. But I'm aware some of you do prefer that power fantasy of just being immortal and blowing everything up. So, while I might like this balance, I need to hear your thoughts. From longtime tanks, new tanks, and especially tanks coming from other games like Final Fantasy XIV, I want to hear how you feel about tanking right now, whether you've played it yourself or just hearing my thoughts about it. Because as much as I like to think I have a grasp on this tanking thing, I am still on the relatively newer side to taking it seriously. But hey, still be friendly in that comment section. I know the devs like to watch my videos, and of course, I've loved chatting with all of you in the past couple of videos, so please leave me a comment and enjoy the conversations down there. Thank you all so much for watching, and hey, I'll see you in the next one.